So, a funny thing happened earlier this summer. No, this isn't that kind of video. Back in early July, this tweet was put out by one Irate Gamer, teasing a collaboration with quite possibly the granddaddy of the caustic YouTube reviewer, the angry video game nerd. If you know anything about the history between these two figures, this was interesting for a multitude of reasons. For one, the Irate Gamer, real name Chris Bors, was one of many YouTube channels to come out in 2007 that was inspired by the AVGN, real name James Rolfe. What made Irate Gamer stand out, though, was him being chosen as a YouTube partner not long after his video on Super Mario Bros. 2 was released, which got that video and many more of his featured on YouTube's homepage. The response from angry video game nerd fans was, not great.
This is what I think of the Irate Gamer. I think that every time I put on one of his videos, my insomnia is f***ing cured. Literally, he puts me to sleep. He is not funny. He's unrelentlessly boring. He could put anybody to sleep.
This might as well skin James alive and wear the skin over his body. That's how much of a ripoff he is.
And after doing a little research, after doing some research, and after doing even more research...
You get the picture.
Cow piece of dog shit.
Despite Irate Gamer being far from the only person who was inspired by AVGN, he was probably the one who received the most vocal backlash for it. Not even people like Game Dude got as much attention, despite being arguably worse in terms of execution and style. But to be fair, without him, we wouldn't have the best Game Grumps episode ever.
Jeez, you open up a locked treasure chest to get a key. Isn't that ass backwards?
I discovered AVGN pretty late into my teenhood, so I can't say I was there when the rivalry between these two fanbases was at its peak. But I definitely remember watching a lot of these call-out and comparison vids exposing Irate Gamer as a hack copy of a much more talented reviewer and comedian. If you want a bigger idea on how heated this backlash on Irate Gamer was, there's a whole blog starting in 2007 and still going today detailing Chris Bors' entire career and why the author personally believes he's terrible even outside of the Irate Gamer videos. I'm not here to condemn anyone who doesn't like Irate Gamer or Chris Bors as a person. That would be incredibly hypocritical of me. When I was a teenager and well into my early 20s, I would lap up this kind of discourse all the time because, well, it was fun. Uniting under a common banner with others and dunking on someone whose videos were not good was something I and a lot of younger teens, especially gamers, bought into back then. But, over time, Irate Gamer became less and less of a public figure in my mind. Chris Bors would go on to do other projects, the YouTube landscape largely moved away from angry reviewers of pop culture. And I guess my own interests were starting to shift away from all that the later I got into my adult life. Which would eventually bring us full circle back to the tweet announcing the crossover between the former bitter rivals. Well, I say rivals mostly in jest, but even outside their respective fan wars, Chris Bors and James Rolfe didn't seem to think very highly of each other.
What do you think of the Irate Gamer?
I have no reason to answer it. I mean, he pretty much pretends that I don't exist, so why would I even need to say anything about him? I don't realize what that does.
All those years of pent-up bad blood made the announcement of the crossover even more of a surprise, and a lot of people responded to it marginally well. Sure, some people still held on to bitter feelings from way back when, but the majority reaction to this was more of a bewildered acceptance rather than the outright flame war it might have spawned had they done this in 2010 rather than 2020. And, let's face it, 2020 being what it is probably had a lot of people go, yeah, this might as well happen. As someone who still casually watches AVGN from time to time, and someone who looks back on classic Irate Gamer as comedy that fails so magnificently it manages to wrap back around to funny,
Ugh, somebody call 911, because I was robbed.
I was very much in the bewildered acceptance camp. I've only just recently watched the video itself, and it was fine. I mean, it didn't make me reevaluate Irate Gamer as this avant-garde filmmaker underappreciated in his time, but it was basically the same feeling I had watching something like his Aladdin review. Most of the jokes didn't land, the humor came more from how hard he was trying than natural charisma, and there was an ample dose of late 2000s gamer comedy that featured a lengthy diatribe on Madonna and her physical appearance for no reason.
She's the hot bombshell? Ugh, I want to bang her with Mega Man's dick.
Thank you, Chris. That information was really beneficial for me. The actual crossover itself is just an extended cameo on James's part, where he seems to be putting in the same effort into his performance that he does for his own videos. But it was mostly just bizarre seeing these two actually interact in an overall amicable way. Sure, you can dislike Chris Bores as a person for some of the things he said about James, his business practices and career ethics, but at the end of the day, seeing the video all the way through left me with an important question for myself. Was the fact that he ripped off another YouTuber really that much of a crime? Now, I'm not saying that plagiarism isn't the worst or anything, but it's not as though I and several dozens of thousands of people online were the only ones who saw the truth in how inspired he was by AVGN. And it's not like James's livelihood was ever really threatened by Bores or any of his other imitators. I mean, he was always the most popular video game reviewer on YouTube, nothing changed that. So, was it really worth all my time back then to dig through so many parody videos, callouts, and blog posts explaining why Irate Gamer was bad when I already had that opinion? Just going along with the masses and hating something for the sake of hating it? Not really evaluating why I didn't like something and just parroting the popular consensus? Just a few weeks before this crossover was announced, on June 22nd, director Joel Schumacher was declared dead from cancer. Okay, bit of a mood whiplash, I know, but go with me on this. If you were a teenager on the internet in the late 2000s and the name Joel Schumacher came up, it was probably followed by "killed my childhood" or "to my childhood" or something along those lines. All for the unforgivable crime of making a bad movie about Batman. Yes, long before the likes of Rian Johnson, J.J. Abrams, or even George Lucas, it was Joel Schumacher who had become death, destroyer of childhoods. Batman and Robin wasn't exactly a critical darling when it was released in 1997, but the internet would only help to secure its reputation as the worst Batman film ever made well over a decade after it had come and gone, replaced with the much grittier and more realistic take of a billionaire who dresses up as a bat and beats up criminals to help the disenfranchised. And the most unrealistic part of that whole sentence is that a billionaire is helping the disenfranchised. It wasn't just internet reactionaries, though. Even the contemporary response from other Batman media of the time was to blatantly mock Schumacher's approach to the mythos.
Hey, who's talking about Batman? I love Batman. All those muscles, the tight rubber armor, and that flashy car. I heard it can drive up walls. Yeah, sure, Joel.
Yeah, that'll teach you for liking tight rubber armor. This is a Christian neo-Gothic city, damn it! It was all this bad word of mouth and hype. Negative hype? Bad hype? Is that a thing? I don't know. For how bad this movie was that painted a negative picture in my head long before I ever even watched it. Young man, what are you doing? You see, I didn't have much interest in Batman until The Dark Knight came out, where 14-year-old me instantly fell in love with the hyper-realistic take on the characters and the setting. And right after the movie, I went to work studying everything I could about the mythos. Hell, I even got the official Batman encyclopedia at one point. But I didn't get that until I was older, so I mostly stuck to Wikipedia. It was on these hallowed pages of reputable knowledge that I learned about the Batman movies of yesteryear before I ever even saw them. And at some point between the interim of The Dark Knight and Bane's voice rises,
Of course!
I managed to catch most of these movies on TV, including Batman and Robin. And you might think this is where I pull a twist and say I didn't think the movie was bad even when I first saw it, right? No. Given that I was 14 or 15 when I finally saw this movie, of course I was gonna think it was the worst thing to happen to Batman since...
All your money!
Well, a lot of things. The campy tone, the neon lights, the faux Greek architecture, the bat nipples, the...
7 million. Never leave the cave without it.
How dare this movie not treat Batman with the utmost of seriousness and respect? How dare they make his suit anatomically correct? How dare they play up the homosexuality of this clearly straight icon? In hindsight, I think the major reason this movie gets such a thrashing, even to this day, is because it's so against the fan perception of what Batman should be, that of course any self-serious fan is gonna scoff and reject it. And I was certainly no boat rocker when I was a teen. But the sheer vitriol I had for this movie didn't quite make a lot of sense when its predecessor I thought was fine. I caught Batman Forever on TV sometime after & Robin, and for whatever reason found it much more palatable. Even though it's the same campy mood, same writer, same director, same buffoonish acting from big-name stars, and same...
Doesn't Batman ever kiss the girl?
...amount of subtlety. I guess young me would argue that the scenes exploring Bruce's psyche in Forever are what made it the more adult of the two Schumacher films, since Batman and Robin never delved into anything like that.
Death and chance stole your parents. But rather than become a victim, you have done everything in your power to control the fates. For what is Batman, if not an effort to master the chaos that sweeps our world?
Well, at least Batman Forever had Jim Carrey in his peak 90s Carreyness. Sure, it's campy as anything else in the movie, but it's an enjoyable and memorable performance nonetheless. Batman and Robin can't claim something like that.
Alright, everyone! Chill!
But look at what Batman and Robin did to Uma Thurman. They have her hamming it up so much that it nearly ruined her career. How can a Batman movie hire an Oscar-nominated actor and make them say such stupid lines and act so cartoonish and...
Looking for us? Yes, oh, happy day!
Yeah... I think Batman Forever was sort of the chip in my flawed worldview that only a gritty, gothic, and realistic version of Batman should be taken seriously. The kind of worldview that would have made 15-year-old me really eat up the Batman we saw in a movie like Batman v Superman, which had him killing criminals with wanton abandon, and nearly killing the Man of Steel in the world's lengthiest sausage measuring contest.
You're not brave.
But hey, at least Bats v Soups doesn't ogle over Batman's body the way Joel Schumacher's movies did. How gross! Homoeroticism has no place in a Batman movie. A good, manly director like Zack Snyder would never... Even when I started to lighten up on the whole
Batman is serious business, guys.
I still retained a hatred for Batman and Robin that was probably more of a because I have to feeling than anything else. In recent years, possibly in response to Batman v Superman, there's been a bit of a reevaluation of the campier aspects of the character in past movies, even during Tim Burton's tenure. One of the most notable that I watched was a video by Patrick H. Willems wherein he explains why he believes the Schumacher movies aren't as bad as we remember them. I watched it sometime last year, but didn't give it a lot of thought beyond, yeah, I should probably give them another chance at some point. Or at least I should rewatch Batman and Robin. I already knew I thought Batman Forever was fine. The good one of the two. So, here we are, one rewatch later after all the camp, one-liners, and
7 million.
that I hated so much as a teen and after at least 10 years since I first saw it. And I have to say, I had an absolute blast. I'm not gonna pretend that this movie is good. It's still pretty bad. The story is all over the place, the motivations of the Freeze and Ivy team-up aren't fully explained, and it's definitely the most toyetic and brainless of the original Batman quadrilogy. All that said, how can you not enjoy yourself through it? Sure, we all have limits as to how much stupidity we can take, but this is very much my kind of stupid. I mean...
7 million. Never leave the cave without it.
He has a freaking Bat credit card! It's so stupid, it's ingenious! And even for how stupid the movie gets, it's clear that the people behind it do understand a little bit about the character, especially in Bruce's relationship with Alfred, who has way more of a presence in this film than he had in all previous three combined, letting Michael Gough really shine in his performance. I remember the last time I saw this movie, I was still in the I hate it because I have to phase, and didn't really let myself revel in the hilarity of this heavily misguided but really fun movie. And it's kind of a shame that the main reason I rewatched it was not really from a place of curiosity, but more from guilt. You may wonder why I spent so much time in the beginning of this video talking about two grown men who rant about 90s video games. Well, it was mainly to contextualize who I was when I saw Batman and Robin for the first time. How drawn in I was to internet hate mobs and discourses like the whole Irate Gamer versus AVGN debacle. I was very much the kind of guy to repeat the popular opinion rather than try to offer my own opinions and perspective to any given matter, be they fan wars or film criticism. And there was one guy in particular who was pretty popular around this time that fed into the worst of this mindset for me.
A bat credit card? They gave him a bat credit card? They had the balls to give one of the greatest superheroes of all time a bat credit card? No!
The Nostalgia Critic was very much my bread and butter as an angry, cynical teen who thought he was more enlightened than he really was about film and pop culture. The shrill, over-the-top, exaggerated anger he would show for even the most cromulent movie of yesteryear satisfied my cynical itch every week from the time I discovered him around late 2009 to the fall of Channel Awesome in early 2018. And by that point I was probably watching him more for the sake of repetition than actual quality. His video on Batman and Robin was one of the quintessential angry reviews at the time, showing how you could take the format of AVGN and apply it to other media like movies. It was undoubtedly the most popular video in his career infancy, and was certainly one of the first reviews of his that I and countless others came across. And talking about how much I didn't like Irate Gamer for ripping off AVGN when I was a teen, that didn't really stop me from wanting to rip off Nostalgia Critic style for my own video reviews too. Thankfully, I had neither the means nor motivation to truly pursue such a career, but it was always in the back of my mind even so. That maybe one day I'd follow in the footsteps of this great champion of movie criticism and start my own angry online review show. Maybe even get acknowledged by Senpai himself. That was terrible, I'm deleting everything. It was in this desire to mimic Nostalgia Critic that I formed a lot of my own opinions of whatever movie he was talking about at the time, including Batman and Robin. A review that parrots many of the same criticisms fans had of the film for a decade at that point, praises the dark atmosphere of the films that preceded it, and goes on lengthy, sometimes homophobic rants on how the film
My childhood, will you all die?
In the years that followed, Doug Walker would come to regret his Bat credit card rant. More for the fact that he had to repeat it at every con he went to, rather than the fact that he blew something that was just a dumb gag to begin with completely out of proportion. But that was the nature of internet reviewers back then. Intentionally blowing things out of proportion. Exaggerated fan outrage. However, as a teen, I didn't see satire or comedy. I saw legitimate reasons to hate on a movie everyone else had already told me was bad. I took this review as gospel, validation to keep going ahead with the crowd and sling dirt at a movie that was made when I was 3 years old, and at a man who had done me no personal harm. The reputation of Schumacher online, as perpetuated by people like the Nostalgia Critic who would go on to use him as a punching bag every so often, was one of complete incompetence. The guy who had our childhoods and brought Batman to such a low state that only the Christ-like figure of Christopher Nolan could redeem him. And sure, he would never really enjoy critical and commercial success again after Batman and Robin, and there's plenty you can criticize about his later films, smarter people than me already have. But I wouldn't call him incompetent. There is stuff about Batman Forever and Batman and Robin that still works, not just as cheesy, campy comedy. Those scenes where Bruce reflects on how Alfred raised him as he has to cope with the lingering shadow of his father figure's death are some of the most poignant in any Batman film, even more poignant than the relationship they have in the Nolan movies.
I love you, old man. And I love you, too.
While I'd eventually move away from angry reviewers like Nostalgia Critic, I wouldn't truly reconsider my opinions on this movie until after Joel Schumacher had died, where I remembered all the one-liners, camp tone, and even the Bat credit card with much more fondness than disdain. And it's a weird feeling going back to things like a campy superhero film from the 90s or a mediocre video game reviewer from the late 2000s and feeling much more benign about them, while at the same time going back to someone who used to bring me great joy and inspiration to only feel bitter and empty upon realizing he was never as novel or insightful as I thought he was. The thing about growing up is, you find yourself constantly reevaluating the things you either hated or loved. How certain things you thought were genius or hilarious just make you feel bad watching in hindsight. And the things you scoffed at before can bring you some genuine joy for just a little while, even if it's laughing at the silliness of it all. And as much as I want to blame someone like the Nostalgia Critic for making me hate Batman and Robin so blindly, I know I can't really put that on him. I didn't want to challenge myself back then. I didn't want to have an opinion that was my own. I just wanted to go with the crowd and fan rage along with everyone else at that stupid Bat credit card. No one really wants to stick their neck out for a dumb old movie anyway. Right? Long before he died, Joel Schumacher gave a heartfelt apology to any fan who was disappointed in Batman and Robin, openly acknowledging that he had made a film most people were unsatisfied with. I used to think it was mature of me in accepting that apology, but now, in hindsight, I find myself wishing I could apologize to him. The saddest part being, I can't.
Joel, there's more. Your colleagues and your dear friends at CAA, Creative Artists Agency, wanted to commemorate today with a letter which is very personal. But I will end it with, I'll save the personal bit for you later, but by your work and your example, you spark us to feel, to think, and to live on the highest plane, imparting it all with that Cheshire cat smile of yours and your deep soul. Today we celebrate your films and your work as a gifted artist, but most importantly, and with much love, each day we celebrate you, Joel, as a mentor and a truly generous friend. With much affection, Brian Lord, Kevin Huvane, Richard Lovett, John Levin, Scott Greenberg, Jay Baker, and all your CAA family.
Never leave the cave without it.